Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Ask a Navigator. My name's Ian, my pronouns are he and him, and I'm the trans navigator at Southwest Center. What is Southwest Center, you asked? I'm so thankful. Well, it's this place right here, that logo. Southwest Center is an LGBT health center with a specific focus on HIV. We've been around for about the past 30 years, and we have a lot of programs available to you. This month, which is LGBT History Month for those of you straight cisgender persons out there, we have some programs tailored around LGBT history and recognizing intersections among communities. On October 11th is National Coming Out Day. On October 12th, we're bringing we're bringing back with COVID our trans chat. This time it'll be virtual. If you're interested in coming to the trans chat, which will be on a screen like this, only with a lot more people and not just me, you can email me at ecashman@swhiv.org. And my email's right here. Other interventions we have this month. On the 14th, we have our monthly Pizza in the Basics class, where you can come in and learn all about HIV, STIs, and how to keep yourself, your partners, and everyone healthy. You can also learn the cultural significance of HIV as it relates to our community, the LGBT community, and the community in the United States. On the 19th, we have our queer chat group. And on the 17th, I'm referencing a calendar, can you tell? On the 17th is International Pronouns Day. There's also Asexual Awareness Week and Intersex Awareness Day. All of that this month. If you want to learn more, check out swcenter.com or swcenter.org. And let's bring on our co-host for tonight, who's going to tell you about even more of what we do. Mars? There you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here tonight. So I think that I would be remiss if I did not start with the condom program. So some of you guys know that I am the prevention project coordinator, meaning that I help make sure that condoms get out to everyone. So free condoms, free delivery. Our website is nicepackage.org, which you can actually see. Oh, it's on that side over there. And then we are also now doing drive-through testing at the Southwest Center. And they've put up the email address for that now. That is on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They are right now only doing HIV testing, and it is from 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. But it's nice. It's drive-through, so it's quick and should be pretty easy. And finally, hopefully we'll have Ian back here in a second. We will be having a guest tonight. Super excited. Her name is Selene. She is probably one of my best friends, so I cannot help but be excited. But Selene is a Phoenix-based writer. She is the president of the Phoenix Girls of Leather, which means that of which she is also a founding member. Please welcome Selene.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here.
Hi, Selene. How are you tonight?
I'm doing all right. How are you guys?
Pretty good.
I
like the inclusivity. I'm also really good friends with Selene, and I'm so thankful that she's been able to join us for tonight's broadcast. Specifically because tonight we're going to be talking about trans joy and making room for happiness in our transition. This is something that, no lie, Mars and I have been sitting on for a little bit of now, and with the world being as stressful it is, we decided to bring in some joy. And Selene is a person who does that with genuineness. You're the writer, right? Which one is it?
I honestly am blanking.
If you're blanking, then it's both.
Let's go with that one.
So we have some comments coming in. Everybody's saying hi to you. Okay, they love Mars more, and now they love you more.
They did not love me more, us together.
When I was gone, they didn't say bring Ian back, but when you were gone, they were like bring Mars back, bring Mars back. So much so that we made you a co-host. Like that.
Yeah, but that's because they knew you were coming back. I cannot replace you.
Can you?
No.
I mean, you could probably pull most white guys off the street and get something like me. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Tonight is about joy, not self-deprecation.
And this is why we have Selene on.
Like,
So I see your first question in the comments. When was the first time you experienced joy in your transition?
Let's go to our guest first.
It was not the day that I admitted it to myself, but it was probably the day that I admitted it to my friends. I had some trans people that I was already friends with, thankfully, that helped me through a lot of that, and being able to say that to them and for them to just respond with unconditional acceptance absolutely would have been the first like joyful moment.
What about you, Eion?
Oh, there are actually a lot of joyful moments that I don't think there are some like we really share a lot of, like the first hormone day. I can't tell you how many TikTok videos we watch with persons doing their first injection. I'm like, you're not doing that right yet. Or like when you get top surgery, I can't tell you how much inspiration porn I've seen of people waking up from their top surgeries. And this is in the trans masculine realm. But for me, like, I had trouble picking a name, and there was like I tried Jack and Skylar and all these names that were super sexy that I could never pull off. We needed to go a little bit more into nerddom, and I found out that my parents were going to name me Eion before I was born. And so I tried it out, and before that, nobody could remember my name. Like, I'd be dead named constantly in classes. I'd be misgendered constantly. The fact that I wasn't on hormones yet didn't help. And then I picked Eion, and suddenly everyone could remember my name. It was everything was aligning. Like, I remember the first day I did not get dead named once, and granted, testosterone makes it harder to cry, but I think I still would have been crying with just joy. I got on the bus and I looked like that crazy person who was just having a total mental health issue. Like, I'm fairly sure somebody was about to call 211 to request for assistance. And I was just overwhelmed with the simple act of somebody seeing me as me. Oh no, I made the face that I was making on the bus worse.
Oh my God. Okay. First time I experienced joy in my transition. That's hard. I actually would also do a name thing, I think, in that. So in my transition is hard to define because I started socially transitioning long before I did anything medically. So I would say that probably my first joy in my transition was the first time someone asked me what my boy name would be because they couldn't figure it out from my girl name, which I'll put in quotes because sure, whatever. And I told them Mars. And then almost 2 decades later, I came back to that name and made it legal. So clearly I took some joy in telling that person my name was Mars.
I mean, 2 decades?
Yeah, I mean, so I remember telling someone that my boy name was Mars in elementary school. Yeah. Because they were trying to make fun of me by using a boy name, and I was like, then they couldn't figure it out, and so I was like, it's Mars. Just call me Mars. And then that totally that took their power away.
Right.
Because they couldn't find another name to use. And it didn't bother me. It made me happy.
Let's talk about that joy too, about being a trans kid. And like, people are trying to make fun of you. You're like, no, keep doing that.
Right?
That's what I want.
I had a substitute teacher that could not decide if I was a boy or a girl in high school and would just use she, her all the time. And this was before like I'd even figured anything out. And I'm like, why is this kind of like awesome? Like
I've had many cocktails with like a lot of trans persons, and we always tend to default to those joyful stories about it's never really happy when you figure it out. It's more scary.
Yeah.
But like the little bursts of joy along the way, like the little happy moments are ubiquitous. it's something that like almost organically comes up when you bring a whole bunch of new trans persons in a room and add liquor. Like that's what happens. We talk about that, and then we talk about how we tried to gently put
the
down
code switching.
the code
Yep.
switching. We're trying to figure out, are you trans? I'm trans. I started puberty really late. Like you.
Oh my goodness. Oh, I like the background change that just happened. Ooh.
Oh, it's pretty.
It's pretty.
So I see another one. What is the first thing you did in your transition that brought you joy? Selene?
There was like a senior underground spirit week at my high school, and one of the days was like a gender swap day, and so that was the first time that I wore a dress. I went over to my friend's house like really early in the morning to get ready with her, and she like loaned me some clothing. She's also like itty bitty like me. And so I'm not sure that at the time I knew that was like one of the first moves in my transition, but like actually wearing something that was just sort of affirming and euphoric was really cool. And years later, she actually gave me that dress. She was cleaning out her closet, and she was like, "This was the first dress that you wore, and I want you to have it." So I still have it.
That's awesome. That's what I find kind of unique too about like these moments of joy, and maybe it's because we're focusing on the initial part, is that it's very simple to find happiness, and a lot of the times we focus on the complex issues that make us miserable. Transphobia is a thing. The intersectionalities of not being able to get healthcare, and not being able to change your name, and not being able to get a job because you're trans, so you can't get healthcare or maybe change your name. Like those are the things I spend hours and hours in meetings and workshops educating people. But much to the detriment of these little stories about like it took a dress to make you feel good.
Right.
And for me, it was a leather jacket, which is indicative of other things. I found a $5 Donna Karan New York leather jacket in a Goodwill that fit me like a glove. And that jacket actually kind of became a little bit of a symbol of my transition, because it still fit me as my body changed. And it wore in certain places as my body changed. And it, like I have a picture of me day one testosterone, and like eventually it was stolen out of my car. But like 5 years in, and it was just like that jacket held a lot of memories, and I was very upset at first it being stolen. But now, like I imagine that it's found its way into the hands of another little trans boy. I really hope it does, because it's not worth that much. I hope it went to Goodwill. I hope another trans boy found it, and I hope it becomes like a book series later. Like screw the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. I want the broship of the leather jacket.
And then we're back to me, and I'm like, how do I deal with my transition? So it's also that my transition socially happened in two different times, in that like in elementary school and high school, like that whole school period, people just treated me like I was non-binary, and I didn't have to transition or come out. It just was. So I'm like, do I pick moments of joy from that? And then it was like I went into hiding and no one knew, because I didn't know how to come out to people, and it took a long time for me to start figuring out how to come out to people. So picking one from each for things I did in my transition, not limiting myself to what friend groups I played in as a child. I'm totally going to call one of the first things that brought me joy in my transition as a kid, because at that age when the boys and the girls sort of split up, both groups decided I was one of them, and I never corrected them. And that was like, to this day, that is one of the most formative things that happened for me, and absolutely a moment of joy. I would say later on, one of the first things that I did to bring me joy, it didn't bring me joy in the moment. In the moment, it was terrifying, and I thought I was going to throw up. But the response I got brought me joy, which was I had come out in little bits and pieces with my pronouns to friends over the years. This is before any medical transitioning, anything like that. But I'd never held anyone to a standard where I said, you need to call me by these pronouns. And through a series of events, I very, very loudly announced to my largest group of friends that I needed them to call me by a certain set of pronouns and that I was trans. And they handled that really well. Them handling it well is joyful. It felt like I was going to throw up while I was doing so.
Like, yeah. I mean, I don't think a lot of people really understand the gaseous distress that comes with extreme happiness. We're getting a lot of affirmations in the comments, just so everybody knows. Like, I'm getting amazing. Apparently, broship is now a thing. We can make it and a lot of comments about that's kind of how it should be. I would have loved to have been claimed by both the boys and the girls when I was younger, because being an effeminate gay man, that fits on some levels. But the fact is, like, a lot of people don't make space. People, I mean children, and by children I mean children and politicians, don't make space for trans persons in their groups of joy. And it's heartening to hear stories like yours that kind of go against the typical narrative that you would expect in a session with a psychotherapist on a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we were all supposed to be loners, right? No. We're actually quite good at connecting to people when we're given the proper language.
Yeah.
We also have somebody who knows all three of us and is saying hi. Oh, another question. Outside of medical transition, what has brought you joy in your journey? Mars, we're going to start with you this time.
Me this time? I feel like I've done a lot of outside of my medical transition responses. But I'm going to talk about some stuff that has brought me joy outside of that stuff, in that I used to hate makeup. I used to hate makeup because it was the epitome of femininity in my brain. And now that I have started medically transitioning, I cannot wait to put on makeup. I love makeup. I crave that look. I really enjoy it. So that's one of those things that brings me joy. Also, totally screwing with people, making them question what my gender could possibly be. Absolute joy in my life.
I like the screwing with people. Like, that's kind of related to my transition, but I think I told you both this when Caitlyn Jenner first came out. I was at a conference, and a whole bunch of people were talking about how dad name, dad gender for pronouns, like, didn't belong in certain circles, and that she was crazy and things like that. The power I held holding my beer going like, oh, I'm like her though, but the opposite. Do you want to say that to my face? The quailing of the boomers, the quailing of the middle-aged boomers. And Selene, have you had experiences like that, or other experiences outside of medical transition related to joy? Like, feel free to hop in at any time. We don't have to go into it.
So when you shared the topic with me, I was thinking about what do trans people need to be happy, and of course I was thinking about a lot of the large, like, structural issues. But one thing not related to medically transitioning that I kept coming back to over and over again was each other. I am so much happier when I have other trans people in my life and sort of these rich relationships. And I like the way that we relate to each other. Ian's always embarrassed of like the story of the first time that we met each other, but I think it's terrible. I won't tell it.
I mean, we've told the story of how you and I met, so I think it's time we hear how you and Selene met.
Oh, it's bad. It's so bad.
So we met at a New Year's party, and he just sort of like word vomited in his words, not mine, like a bunch of stuff to me. But I like it because it sort of exemplifies one of my favorite things about how trans people relate to each other. Is it seems like we have this instantaneous kind of rapport with each other, that we form these deep bonds, and there's a lot of trust, like even with almost perfect strangers. And so that's definitely. I don't think Ian would have word vomited if there wasn't some trust there and he didn't feel safe. And I'm glad he felt safe.
There was no excuse for the word vomit. I was mostly sober at that point. I just did not have control over my mouth. I was saying everything that came to mind. Because I was at that time living up in Flagstaff, which, despite being a university town, there wasn't a lot of trans people. I've connected them in real life, and I'd never found another trans person in the wild. Like, I've met people at support groups and things, but like to meet somebody at a party. And so I did that, and then I also like accidentally gave a backhanded compliment when I was trying to give a compliment, and then quickly backpedaled out of it, and then tried to make myself shut up. And it did. I don't know. Somebody came in and saved me at that point. I think it was one of our mutual friends.
I also assumed positive intent, so it was fine. Like,
I think that's really powerful, though, talking about our community and how we interact, especially once we find each other. And it comes back to what you're talking about like you put down hints and go, if they pick it up, where does this conversation go?
I once was in a Wendy's with my friends, just like getting something to eat, and there was another trans woman, like an elder trans woman, sitting there eating, and we ended up just like pulling our tables together and talking for like, I swear it was like 2 hours until her husband came to like pick her up and take her home. And it was about transness, it was about politics, it was about like professional EVE online gaming. Like, it was I enjoyed this random closeness that we have with each other.
I once was connected to another non-binary trans friend by a mutual friend of ours who was like, the two of you need to go have coffee. So we did. And it was a 2-hour conversation in which I could not tell you everything we covered, because I know for a fact somewhere in there we discussed revolution. And then it became a Martian revolution because I'm Mars. And I know there was a whole bunch of other stuff in there that I'm like, none of it was trans related. We just got along immediately. It was like that. I see that we have another question. We did all answer that question, right? I got lost in our conversation.
I think so, but I think something else I want to say is, like, so as part of my position as Trans Navigator, one of the things I created was the Trans Social. And I created that very intently not to be a support group. And support groups do have their place in our kind of like community. They are crucially important for baby trans people. Because sometimes you need more of that structure. But for elder trans persons, like a year or so into your transition listening, what I don't see a lot is we're not allowed to be social with one another in a lot of circumstances, because we've all been trained to have the support group model at this point. And so if you are older and a trans person, you go to a support group and you're like, this doesn't fit. It's not because you don't fit with trans people. It's because you need a social group. And so that's what I intended to create at the Trans Social Group. And not only did it create this joy in the interim, like we've talked about everything from snakes to building codes with bathrooms to everything under the sun and more. But it's also, if you're a trans person who's kind of alone or you think you're more cis-assumed, you still need your community, because when you are connected to that community, powerful things happen. I had a client who was able to get roommates and no longer be homeless. I had a client who was able to find a surgeon that was in her network that I couldn't find because they both had the weird insurance plan. And I consider myself pretty savvy with insurance. And it created these really long-lasting bonds that brought so much fulfillment beyond the I'm done with transition. I like what you said, Selene, of we need each other.
Mm-hmm.
We need each other to have joy, because when we look at each other, we're seeing our lives through our eyes. And we're not seeing a lot of the bogus that we have to deal with. So if you are isolated as a trans person, please come to Southwest Center's chat. Please connect with other trans persons online. Please make a socially distant meetup, because we do need each other.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm so glad you touched on that, because that was in my notes as well, actually. Just support groups absolutely are of sort of a vitally important function to our community, and I've very much needed them at various stages in my life. But if that's the only interaction I'm having with other trans people, it's heavy, and it can weigh on you. And so I'm always very encouraging of everyone to figure out what sort of balance they need in their life, and to make sure they're getting that social element as well, and just talking to people about anything, and having that social interaction with each other. Lighter fare.
Okay. And I also think it's when we can think about the rest of the LGBT community, y'all, it's LGBT History Month. There's no excuse not to know your history at this point. There's the internet that exists. There are wonderful writers like Selene out there. And trans people connecting with each other built a neighborhood in San Francisco. It's called the Tenderloin District. Gay people connecting with each other is the reason why we have marriage equality for the time being. When you connect with each other, you make yourself powerful and you make yourself heard. And on top of all that, you make yourself happy. And speaking of connection, where'd Selene go?
Are you there?
Yep.
Okay.
Do we have another question in the comments? Because I think that was the first.
We did. Are there any forms of media, whether art, movies, books, etc., that portray trans or non-binary characters that have brought you joy?
Can you repeat that one more time, please?
Are there any forms of media, whether art, movies, book, etc., that portray trans and non-binary characters that have brought you joy?
So I'll actually just say, go on, Selene, your turn.
No, you first.
I was going to say, I'll be honest, literally every time I see a trans character handled well, it brings me joy. So one of them that I saw recently is very, very subjective in this case, because I think I told Selene about this a year ago. So recently there was a character in Cable Girls, where the show is not at all about the LGBT community. It is set around the time that telephones just barely became a thing. And they had a trans character, a trans man, being played by, as far as I know, by a cis woman, unfortunately. But the way the other characters handled it was amazing. Her group of his group of friends. Sorry, my brain had to process. Wait, which character? His group of friends. Just handled it. They were just okay, well, this is who you are. This is what we're gonna do. And there was one point where he decides to go get help at a mental institution. That turns out exactly the way you would expect it to for the times. They didn't sugarcoat anything. They didn't make it less absolutely. but his friends were cool. His friends were good about it. And that was just amazing. And it showed up like I wasn't looking for it in that. And so that was great.
I think we were fighting each other for a second there. So I ended up taking a class on trans and intersex literature and film in college that was fantastic. And one of the books that I chose to do like an independent study on was a YA novel called If I Was Your Girl by Meredith Russo. And that was super good. It kind of like Mars said, didn't sugarcoat anything. Like the book literally opens after she's been the victim of this transphobic thing and she's kind of being shipped off to her dad to just start over. But I thought it handled it with a lot of realism. It handled a lot of the complexities of like queer life and life with other queer people in like a nuanced way, which is something that I'm always really happy to see.
Like, honestly, when I think of book recommendations related to trans stuff, actually any media recommendations, y'all are my first two. I can't tell you how enriched my life has been. I read transgender history and I've read some essays about Julia Serrano, and then Selene was like, here's Whipping Girl. And then I read that and I'm like,
so good. So good.
So good. If you have not read it,
I recommend it to everyone.
It's at the library. It is free, people. And if you do not have a library card, what are you even doing here? Like,
Ian.
No shaming, only joy.
Yeah, I was like, I will not partake in this shaming.
I'm just saying that they need to put the show on their mobile phones and then get their butt on the library card. Oh, wait, they could just open up another browser and get an online library card. Yeah, like, it's just, my life has been made so much richer. Somebody said, what book? It's Whipping Girl by Julia Serrano, who is just amazing. And she coined a lot of those terms, right? Like trans misogyny, sexism.
She does not take credit for them personally, but most people say that she came up with trans misogyny.
And like the fact that everybody is willing to credit her and she still goes, yeah, no, community brought this language forward.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate the kind of carefulness there that like, no, somebody else might have said this first.
Yeah. And other things too, like beyond books. I know I've geeked out at least with one of you about trans representation in comics. Okay, both of you. And like comic book representation in general, like web comics. Like Sophie Labelle is one of my favorite artists.
Yes.
I hope I'm saying her name right. It's French. I tried.
I believe so.
Who has been doing this wonderful political critique of how trans persons are treated. Then there's also like Tab Kimpton, who's a non-binary artist who wrote Chaos Comics, who really, I think, was one of the first artists to go like, well, why don't you write about straight cis people? And he's like, because I don't care enough to add to that wealth of literature. I'm fighting for my community to have some representation. And then, honestly, if it weren't for Tab, I don't think I would be where I am today, because he portrayed one of the first ever gay trans men I've ever seen. And that was something that did not occur to me. And his name's Tom, short for Tomboy, which is like the cutest thing ever. And he just is just for lack of a better word, a badass character. He's not weak. He's not somebody impersonating womanhood. He is a man. And there's a really frank discussion where he gets physically and almost sexually assaulted by a group of people who hate him. And it really messes with his head about his manhood because he wasn't strong enough to protect himself. Despite the fact that he's also somehow like a karate and bagua champion. But there's only so much you can do when somebody throws a brick at your head. And so like when I think about media and things like that, and I think about when we share things significant, the thing that always comes to fruition is like, these are stories that actually reflect our real lives. Like you said, Mars, like things are done well. And the joy we find is in the connection with each other and those shared experiences and the fact that other people see us. We don't always need happy endings. We want more happy endings. I think good media in general just has those characteristics that make us want to share it.
I actually, like, almost as soon as I finished and Selene started talking, I was like, oh my God, I forgot to mention Chaos Comics. So I'm so glad you did. I also want to add, it's not necessarily trans related, but Tab also did a comic called 50 Shades of A, which is about a asexual person who enters the BDSM community. And between those two comics, like, these things give me life. Just absolutely.
They're also
real asexual representation just made me so incredibly happy because I never get to see that. I know that's not what this show is about, but like, hi, happiness.
I think the show is mainly about intersections. Like, just look at the screen. We're all trans in one way or another, but we're really not the trans in the same way. And like, we're more than just being trans.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm privileged enough to be the son of immigrants and went to college and university and got through that pretty okay. But also am HIV positive and gay. And I won't make you two unpack everything for the inspiration porn. But like, I think that also circles back to when we connect with each other, having that inherent thing in common, even though it's so vastly different, kind of speaks to the magnitude of a trans experience and a queer experience beyond that. Like, we need each other because we're dealing with some really hard things.
I do know we have more questions.
Yeah, I'm sure
a whole lot's gone on in the comments while we were not.
We could totally talk about books for the next 25 minutes if you don't stop me. So.
Legit. Are there things associated with your sex assigned at birth that bring you joy, and is it easier to enjoy them after transitioning?
My vagina.
I mean, not inaccurate.
I was waiting to like see if we're allowed to talk about that, honestly. There are things that I enjoy about my genitals. I don't think a plus column is enough to like not make me want bottom surgery, but like there are things that I enjoy about them, certainly.
I love that you admit that because it really removes us from the narrative of like, if any of y'all cis folk out there are asking if we want the surgery, please be specific.
There's that. And also like, our reasons for wanting or not wanting to get it don't have to be simple. Like there can be a plus column and a minus column.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I've read enough fan fiction that are critical evaluations of cis men's dicks, then I am allowed to evaluate what I have in my pants by myself.
So true.
And
I mean, I mentioned some of mine before, like with makeup, but like a bright red lipstick, it is a thing that I enjoy so much more now, especially in my bright red dress. Definitely a thing I'm enjoying more now that, you know, we've got the facial hair come in. I mean, I think I've also mentioned before my chest along the similar lines for you with y'all. I have plus and minus things on that particular column of my chest. I have not made decisions yet on if I want to do anything or not there. But there are plenty of times when it brings me a lot more joy now than it used to.
Another thing I would add, there's a lot of like being socialized as a boy that I did not like. But for whatever reason, it's more socially acceptable for boys to like get super into video games as children. I don't think video games are gendered in the slightest. But that's something that I enjoyed. I play video games with my friends 4 out of 5 weekdays a week. And I really enjoy having that bond with them. So that's something that I'm glad that I ended up being raised with.
I think too, like the things that it's almost a privilege that cisgender people don't get. The things that we're allowed to carry forward with us from our It's not necessarily around our sex assigned at birth, but a gender that was imposed upon us. Like, I feel really empowered as a man when I understand more critically why I don't feel comfortable with certain aspects of femininity, and then can just say, no, I'm not going there. Like, I love that I'm able to critically look at my life and the expectations and privileges I'm afforded, and I can understand more than any cisgender man would why women might be afraid to walk home alone at night, and why that's important. And like, it baffles my mind that a lot of cisgender men just can't get that. I'm like, of course they have it. They haven't felt that fear. And the fact that I'm now in a position of power to do something about it is super awesome too. It's not awesome that sometimes I am viewed as that predator. Like, I knew I was passing when I was walking home from university one night, and a woman in front of me just took off running. But at least I can understand the world a little bit better based on where I came from, and what I was not necessarily meant to be, but told to be for a little bit. And I think if trans persons in ancient societies were like renowned, we were spiritual leaders, we were viewed as advisors. A lot of our capacities in Indigenous America were that we took care of orphan children. Like, we were entrusted with children. People didn't fear us. And the like joy that comes from me thinking about that is our legacy, that because we have that more insight, that because we can see the world with more complexity, people used to trust us a lot more than the average person. Trust us enough to lead them, to guide them, to help them. I think, Mars, you were talking about, like, was this you about death rights with a trans person? Like
way before this, not today.
Yeah, way before, like, this was like a year ago. About,
yeah, probably.
Yeah, like trans people being bridges to afterlife. Because we already occupy 2 realms. Sometimes more.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the perspective. I might be getting away from the original question a little bit, but I have a friend that the 2 of you know, who's sort of one of the more wise people in our group, and I had this amazing conversation, and I'm not sure if I'm going to do it justice, but he was saying, like, one of the things about trans people that he admires is, like, as opposed to cis het people have these gender roles that they can just kind of fall back on, and they can just ride that through their entire life without really interrogating or doing a lot of introspection and deciding what kind of man or woman or person they want to be. And that's something that we don't have the luxury of, and I take joy in the fact that we don't have the luxury of it.
Like, it may be...
I get to decide what kind of woman I want to be, and I think that's a beautiful thing. Sorry to cut you off.
No, I'm glad you cut me off, because you said it perfectly. Like, I love that I get to decide what kind of man I want to be and what person I want to be beyond my gender. And that's something, like, when we talk with other trans people, that's something that always comes up. I mean, so there's like a running joke in the trans masculine support group. That first it's talking about testosterone, then it's talking about weird things downstairs, and then we talk about how weird male privilege is, in that order. So it's like, you get on the hormones, some really weird things happen that we have to address because it's like, what the is happening in my body? And then once you're able to deal with that, you can move beyond it. And the first thing that comes up is, like, it's so powerful that male privilege exists. And whether you're leaving it, entering it, or occupy it only some of your days, like, you see that cisgender people fall back on the structure all the time, and it's not right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've told you, I've told you my when I knew I was passing story, which was very similar to what you just said, except mine was I pulled up to a gas station, and that look that women get. By the way, cis het men who don't know this, there is a look women give each other when a man shows up at the gas station at night, figuring out if you're a predator. And when I saw that happen about me, I went, oh shit. And then I brought it to a bunch of my cis male friends being like, how do I not cause people to do this? And they all went, that doesn't happen. So, by the way, this happens.
Yeah.
They gave me a lot of advice on how to not scare women when I walk, though. That wasn't the current issue, but... Yeah.
I've had that, like, with working out at gyms and stuff with like one of my friends who isn't a woman but is perceived as a woman. And another girl came up to her and went, oh, such and such is waiting outside for you, thinking I was the predator. And like, I can fall back on the gay trope, but I can choose to fall back on that. I'm like, oh girl, please. Somehow being gay makes me inherently less of a threat.
I have noticed that.
Yeah, it is a superpower. And it's such a contradiction to, like, total side tangent, and then we'll address the next one. But when people perceive me as having a penis and gay, I am not a threat. But when somebody perceives somebody as a woman having a penis, she is. It's not the penis, people.
No.
It's your perception.
So I am very excited that this question came in, because I know that this was one that we had kind of wanted to address at some point, or a theme we wanted to talk about at some point. Why are trans experiences not inherently framed with joy?
I need a shirt. I need a shirt. I need pictures.
I'm like, welcome to Let's Hand Ian the Soapbox.
You two talk first, and I'll nod vigorously, because you'll probably hit the more important points rather than backtracking into history to where the Nazis burned our history.
So I think for whatever reason, the media likes to have some trauma porn with people of queer identities a lot of the time. I think part of that ties back to the like whole bury your gays thing. Yeah. I'm having complicated thoughts about this. You go.
I have a lot of thoughts on this, so I will try to not soapbox for too long. But I really do think that it has a certain degree to do with, as you were saying, trauma porn. I think that's really important. I think transphobia has extensive roots in homophobia, and these two things are very, very intrinsically tied. I think also it has to do with, if it bleeds, it leads. So it tends to be that negative stories in general, not just about us, tend to be more prevalent anyway. But then I think that trans-led media also sometimes focuses more on the negatives than the positives, because we spend so much time yelling, hey, I'm having issues. Can someone help me with the issues, and not being heard? That the first time that we actually get heard, we really just go, let me dump all of the issues on your plate. Because there's no other, we have such a buildup, and we've been trying for so long, that becomes the first place that we focus, because we've never had anyone listen to us on that before.
Yeah, I think more media depictions in general need to be framed with us having joy and showing kind of that other side of things. I remember the first trans woman to get married in a comic book. Like, as soon as I found out that was going to be a thing, I went and I bought the issue, and I plan on framing it, just because showing us having those happy moments is kind of rare.
I think too, like so much on this, just so much, but the wanting to definitely get things done, and this is mainly to trans leaders out here, and I am guilty of that, by the way, 100% guilty. I do trainings for a whole bunch of people. Like, I teach people every day about what it means to be trans, and it is so much easier to make an impact with somebody when you say, did 33% of trans persons had a bad experience with their healthcare provider last year? Did you know that in Phoenix, Arizona, 2 trans women have been murdered and both of their killers have walked free. Did you know? And because that bad news stays with people. We are biologically programmed to remember bad things over good things. And when we find joy in successes, it's usually in the little things. And a lot of times that's really hard to celebrate in isolation, because unless you have another trans person who understands just how significant it is that you got your therapy letter for surgery, there's nobody to celebrate with. And it kind of circles back to what Selene says about we need to celebrate with each other. And so like a call I would have to all trans leaders and all trans constituents, whether you are talking to Congress or you're just your family, is we are not in this to avoid suffering. When I transitioned, I was surviving, but when I transitioned, I lived for the first time. It sounds very cheesy, but colors were brighter, food tasted better, and I became infinitely more able to interact with this world. And it's getting cisgender people to recognize that privilege that they have on the daily, to recognize that when they walk through this world, they have those comforts that we don't have, and that we are desperately trying to get them, and sometimes more. And so like I've changed a lot on my training programs to when I talk with people, like the first thing we start off is like, I want you to do an association. Tell me everything you know about transgender. And I get FTM, I get transitioning, I get hormones, I get it. And then all the negative adjectives come up. And I'm like, the goal at the end of the day is for you to learn something about trans in this workshop. But my personal goal for every one of you, whether you're trans or cis, is leaving thinking that trans persons are people, that we deserve love, and as Jai said last time, health, and that our stories are not here for like inspiration via trauma. Our stories are here just to exist, and we are entitled to the happiness of existing. And I think we're entitled to far more than that. Like I want a world one day where our world is so filled with joy and expectations for trans people that we have 9 Supreme Court justices who are trans. I want a trans president. I want a trans hospital. And we're not going to get there by selling ourselves on woe is us, like all the things are wrong. Yeah, you need to pay attention to that, everybody out there. But we're going to sell it as our goal is happiness. Our goal is existence. And we are entitled to it because we are already here. And so it's like, I will go further into the soapbox, but none of our experiences really are inherently framed with joy. And that should be our goal in everything we do.
I'm going to totally jump back to another question, to the media question, because I remembered another piece of media that I really highly recommend for people, which is Sandman Comics by Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
One, Neil Gaiman wrote a trans woman into the comics, and I mean, especially for the time, but even now, did a pretty good job, all things considering. And 2, if you don't know about Sandman, I don't have the time to give you a full recap on everything, but essentially there are certain characters that never die, and one of them is the embodiment of desire. And Neil Gaiman made the embodiment of desire non-binary and able to change genders and presentation at will. And I those comics when I was probably a tween, and desire uses the pronoun it. And such an incredibly validating experience to see not only a character be powerful and non-binary, but literally be the embodiment of everyone's desire. Not just like kind of powerful, but have to be attracted to this creature, person, being, whatever you want to consider this. And that was so powerful for me, and still is.
We need Selene jump in after me, but I think we need to be aiming for that. Like the example I give for a lot of people is when they settle with their care, they settle with their hormones, they settle with their surgery. I'm like, no, you're paying money like everybody else. I had somebody who had a subpar surgery result, and I'm like, how much did you pay? And he's like, $10,000. And I'm like, you should look like a model. Expect that for yourself.
Yeah.
Expect yourself to be like Desire. Selene, what were you gonna say?
I don't think I was.
You're just like very close to the screen. I'm like, oh, she has words.
Sorry. No, I'm just like moving around to like not be stiff.
We only have a few more minutes, and I'd like to end this. It's not a question that we got in the comments, but could we each say something, because I know this has been a rough year, something that's brought you joy in this year? So I'll actually start, and it's been this show. It was after one of these episodes that we turned everything off, and I remember just sitting there talking with even the person in the back for that episode and just going, every single person making this in this moment is trans. And I nearly cried. Like, trans people making trans media for trans people and allies, I nearly cried. So this show brings me joy, and I'm really glad we do it every month.
I remember you telling us that, and then I did cry. How about you, Selene?
So when the Bostock ruling happened, well, I was sitting at work and I just kind of logged in to Instagram and caught like Laverne Cox's live stream that Chase Strangio hopped on, and like the jubilation and all of that just absolutely made my day.
Can you give some more context to that for persons who don't know?
Yeah, so the Bostock case was a landmark case that came before the Supreme Court earlier this year that ruled that LGBTQ people are, I believe it's Title VII, employment protections we do fall under the auspices of that. And the way the Supreme Court is right now, it was kind of we didn't have high hopes for it, but it was not nearly as close of a ruling as they were expecting, and that was much reason for celebration.
I remember that, and it was like I was echoing from the marriage equality decision, but it was even more because I would argue that the ability to work is more important than the ability to get married for poorer persons.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and that live stream too, they just talked about like the work that still has to be done, and like they really put it in perspective, and didn't really simplify it. It was a very genuine kind of talk with their audience.
Apologies if you hear my puppies in the background, by the way. Working from home has its benefits and drawbacks.
They're so rambunctious.
They are, and they are puppies. There's the excuse. My poor partner is doing the absolute best he can. But for joy for me, speaking of working from home and all the isolation and everything that's going on, honestly, this year felt like I was getting sucker punched in the gut over and over again. Like, it's some days were just hard to get up. Like, even in recent memory, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, may her memory be a blessing. Like, all the things happening with COVID, the worrying about what's going to happen to my family. My mom is an ER nurse, for those of you who don't know, and she has been on the front lines of COVID this entire time, and I don't think she's taken more than 3 days off. So we're not too close, but I do worry about her constantly. And so it's like, there is no space or room for joy. And then it hit me one day. Everything I do throughout every day since the pandemic happened has been 100% targeted at connecting to other people. Our priorities are always to connect with other people. Every infrastructure we've laid out, including this show, to how much media is created by persons who are now unemployed, to how desperately we cling to our phones, to how we've come up with convoluted ways to socially distance, shows that when shit literally hits the fan, we strive out to reach out to one another. And it is beyond beautiful to see that in real time. that it is our deepest instinct to belong and connect. And I've used that to kind of ground me. And it's one of the reasons why, like, every time Mars talks about trans people doing trans things, connecting with trans persons, I get teary-eyed. And when Selene agreed to join the show, I'm like, we're doing the work to connect to one another. It's a very Irish way to experience joy.
Well, this was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed this, and I'm so glad we got to have you on, Selene.
Thank you for inviting me. It was very nice to be here.
Maybe we'll have you in the future, like if you have some things coming up in the docket as a writer that you want to talk about.
I am definitely open to that.
Awesome. We're going to say goodbye to Selene. And Mars, what do you think of tonight?
I think it went pretty well. This was good.